Welcome to Unwrap Reality, where we narrate stories on things that happen in real life.
How I Lost Millions. The brutal truth about money most people will never learn. What does it feel like to have everything and then lose it all? Imagine waking up one morning, stepping out onto the balcony of your million-dollar penthouse, sipping coffee as you gaze at the city skyline below. It's a life most people dream about, right? That was me, a self-made success story, or so I thought. But here's the brutal truth. None of us are immune to mistakes, no matter how smart or accomplished we think we are. And trust me, my mistakes didn't just cost me money, they nearly destroyed me. When I started building my empire, I wasn't some overnight sensation. I worked hard, took risks, and clawed my way to the top. At first, every decision felt calculated, every move deliberate. People looked at me with admiration, calling me a visionary. My friends joked that I could turn anything into gold. And honestly, I started believing them. Somewhere along the way, though, something shifted. Confidence turned into arrogance, and caution gave way to recklessness. I stopped questioning whether an opportunity was too good to be true because, well, hadn't everything worked out perfectly so far? But here's the thing about illusions. They only last until reality comes crashing down. For years, I lived in this bubble of invincibility, convinced that nothing could touch me. Every deal I signed seemed smarter than the last, every investment more promising. Yet deep down, there were warning signs I chose to ignore. Late-night doubts crept in, whispers telling me I was playing a dangerous game. Still, I silenced those voices, telling myself I knew better. Looking back now, I realize those moments weren't warnings. They were lifelines I refused to grab. Because what came next wasn't just failure, it was devastation. And that's where the real story begins. I'll never forget the day I met a guy named Ryan at an upscale networking event in downtown Manhattan. He was charismatic, sharp-dressed, and had this aura of someone who'd already made it in life. Within minutes of talking to him, he pitched me on what sounded like the opportunity of a lifetime, a cutting-edge tech startup that promised exponential returns within months. It wasn't just his pitch that hooked me, it was the fear of missing out. Everyone else around us seemed intrigued too, their eyes lighting up as they nodded along with his every word. My competitive side kicked in almost immediately. If these people are jumping in, why shouldn't I be leading the charge? I thought to myself. So, without doing much research beyond a glossy presentation and some vague financial projections, I handed over a significant chunk of my savings. It felt reckless even then, but I justified it by telling myself that success favors the bold. Besides, hadn't I always been someone who took risks and won? 4 weeks after signing the paperwork, I felt unstoppable, checking my phone constantly for updates, imagining how this would catapult me to even greater heights. But slowly, cracks began to show. The company missed its first milestone, then another. Emails went unanswered, and calls were dodged until one day, the entire operation vanished into thin air, along with my money. Looking back now, I can see exactly where I went wrong. It wasn't just about trusting the wrong person, it was about letting greed cloud my judgment. I wanted instant gratification, something flashy to prove I was still ahead of the game. What I didn't realize was that real wealth isn't built overnight. It's cultivated through patience, discipline, and relentless due diligence, none of which I exercised during that disastrous investment. And yet, instead of learning from my mistake, I doubled down, convincing myself that the next big score would make up for everything I'd lost. That decision haunted me for years, not because of the money alone, but because of what it revealed about my mindset. At the time, I believed I was invincible, untouchable, incapable of failure. But losing that fortune taught me something far more valuable than any amount of cash could buy. It taught me humility, and though I didn't know it yet, this lesson would become the foundation for everything I achieved moving forward. The worst part about making a bad decision isn't the loss itself. It's the way it warps your thinking afterward. I should have walked away, licked my wounds, and reevaluated everything. But instead, I did the exact opposite. Fueled by embarrassment and a desperate need to prove myself, I started chasing even riskier opportunities. Anything that promised a quick rebound became irresistible. I told myself I was being strategic, that I was simply reallocating resources to higher return ventures. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was gambling with my future, hoping against hope that one big win would erase all my mistakes. It's funny how fear can drive you to make the same errors over and over again. Each time I invested in another can't-miss deal, I felt a flicker of doubt creeping in, but I pushed it aside, telling myself this time would be different. This time, I'd get it right. The problem wasn't just the investments themselves, though. It was the mindset behind them. I stopped seeing money as something to grow responsibly and started viewing it as a tool to fix my ego. My judgment was clouded by desperation, and every dollar I threw into those sinking ships only made the hole deeper. There was one particular deal that stands out in my memory, not because it worked, but because it epitomized everything that was wrong with my approach. It was a real estate venture pitched by an old acquaintance who swore it was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. All the red flags were there: the lack of transparency, the pressure to act fast, the vague answers to my questions, but I ignored them all. I even borrowed money to fund it, something I never thought I'd do. At first, things seemed promising, or at least I convinced myself they were. But within months, the project collapsed, leaving me deeper in debt than ever before. What hurt the most wasn't the financial toll. It was the realization that I had no one to blame but myself. Every poor decision, every reckless move, had been mine alone. No one forced me to invest in those doomed ventures. No one twisted my arm to take on more debt. I did it all because I couldn't face the idea of failure. Because somewhere along the way, I'd tied my self-worth to my net worth. And now, both were crumbling faster than I could rebuild them. It's strange how life can take you from the highest highs to the lowest lows in what feels like the blink of an eye. For me, that descent into rock bottom wasn't a single moment. It was a slow, suffocating slide. The weight of my mistakes pressed down on me every day, heavier and heavier, until I couldn't breathe. My bank accounts were drained, my credit cards maxed out, and the calls from creditors became relentless. It wasn't just the financial ruin that broke me. It was the shame. I had always prided myself on being someone who had it together, but now I couldn't even look at myself in the mirror without feeling like a failure. The hardest part was the toll it took on my relationships. Friends stopped calling, probably because they didn't know what to say, or maybe they just didn't want to get dragged into my mess. Family tried to help at first, but their sympathy eventually turned to frustration. "When are you going to stop throwing good money after bad?" my brother asked me one night during a particularly heated conversation. I didn't have an answer for him then, but the truth was, I didn't know how to stop. I was trapped in this cycle of trying to fix things by making them worse, and the harder I tried, the deeper I sank. There was one moment that stands out as the absolute low point: the day I had to sell my car. It wasn't just any car, it was the symbol of everything I thought I'd achieved. That car represented freedom, success, and control, all the things I no longer had. Sitting in the driveway, signing over the title to a stranger, I felt like I was giving up a piece of myself. As he drove away, I sat there for what felt like hours, staring at the empty space where the car used to be. At that moment, I realized something I had been avoiding for years. I had lost more than money. I had lost my identity, my confidence, and my sense of purpose. But here's the thing about hitting rock bottom: it forces you to confront truths you've been running from. For me, that truth was simple yet devastating. I had built my entire life on a foundation of sand. My success wasn't real because it wasn't sustainable. It was propped up by ego, greed, and reckless decisions. And when the tide came in, it all washed away. What scared me most wasn't the idea of starting over. It was the fear that I might repeat the same mistakes if I ever got another chance. That realization hurt more than anything else, but it also planted the seed for change. Because sometimes, losing everything is the only way to find out who you really are. If there's one thing I've learned in life, it's that the most valuable lessons often come wrapped in pain. For me, that turning point came on a cold, rainy afternoon when I was sitting alone in my tiny apartment, staring at the wall and wondering how I'd let everything fall apart. I had hit rock bottom, but instead of giving up, something inside me snapped awake. Maybe it was desperation, maybe it was clarity, but for the first time in years, I stopped running from my mistakes and started facing them head-on. And that's when the real work began. The first lesson I learned was humility. Up until then, I had convinced myself that I was smarter than everyone else, that I could outthink any problem or outwork any obstacle. But failure has a way of stripping away those illusions. I realized that I didn't have all the answers, and that was okay. In fact, it was necessary. I started reaching out to people I trusted, mentors who had been through their own storms and came out stronger on the other side. At first, it was hard to admit I needed help, but those conversations changed everything. They taught me the importance of surrounding myself with people who weren't afraid to tell me the truth, even when it hurt. The second lesson was patience. I used to think success was about speed, how fast you could climb the ladder, how quickly you could see results. But losing everything taught me that real growth takes time. It's not about chasing quick wins or flashy opportunities. It's about building something solid, brick by brick. I started reading books on investing, attending workshops, and educating myself on the fundamentals I had ignored for so long. It wasn't glamorous, and it certainly wasn't easy, but for the first time in years, I felt like I was moving in the right direction. Slow progress became my mantra, and it made all the difference. Finally, I learned the power of saying, "I don't know." Those 3 little words were harder to say than I ever imagined, but they saved me from making even more costly mistakes. Instead of jumping into every new opportunity that crossed my path, I forced myself to pause, ask questions, and do the research. I stopped letting fear or pride drive my decisions and started relying on facts and logic. It wasn't just about protecting my money, it was about respecting it. Every dollar I earned moving forward would be treated with care because I knew exactly how hard it was to rebuild what I had lost. That period of reflection and learning wasn't easy, but it gave me something far more valuable than wealth: perspective. I began to understand that success isn't defined by how much you have, it's defined by how you handle adversity. And while I couldn't change the past, I could use it to create a better future. For the first time in a long time, I felt hopeful. Not because I thought everything would magically fix itself overnight, but because I finally had a plan and the wisdom to stick to it. Rebuilding your life after losing everything is not for the faint of heart. It's messy, exhausting, and often feels like you're taking 2 steps forward only to stumble 1 step back. But looking back now, I can say with certainty that those dark days shaped me into someone stronger, wiser, and more resilient than I ever thought possible. The journey wasn't linear, but every challenge along the way taught me something new about myself and about what it truly means to succeed. One of the first tangible victories came when I started applying the lessons I'd learned to small, calculated investments. Instead of chasing high-risk opportunities, I focused on steady, long-term growth. For example, I invested in a modest rental property, not because it was glamorous, but because it made financial sense. The process wasn't easy. There were late nights spent crunching numbers, negotiations that felt like pulling teeth, and moments when doubt crept back in. But when I finally closed the deal and saw my first passive income check roll in, it hit me. This was real progress. Not the flashy kind, but the kind that lasts. That little win gave me the confidence to keep going, brick by brick. As my financial situation improved, so did other areas of my life. Relationships that had been strained began to heal as I worked on being more present and authentic with the people who mattered most. I stopped trying to impress others and focused instead on building genuine connections. My family noticed the change too. They could see that I wasn't just rebuilding my bank account, I was rebuilding myself. One of the proudest moments came when my brother pulled me aside at a family dinner and said, "You're different now," in a good way. Those words meant more to me than any amount of money ever could. Today, I'm in a place I never thought I'd reach again, financially stable, emotionally grounded, and deeply grateful for the second chance I've been given. But here's the thing, I don't measure success by the size of my bank account anymore. Success, to me, is waking up each day knowing that I'm living with integrity, purpose, and intention. It's about making decisions based on values rather than fear or ego. And while I'll always carry the scars of my past mistakes, they remind me of how far I've come and how much I've grown. If there's one takeaway I want you to walk away with, it's this: don't wait until you lose everything to learn these truths. Take it from someone who's been there. It's a painful, humbling experience you don't want to repeat. Start today by asking yourself hard questions. Are your decisions driven by logic or emotion? Are you building something sustainable, or are you chasing quick wins? Surround yourself with people who challenge and inspire you. and never stop learning. Because in the end, the greatest wealth we can accumulate isn't money. It's wisdom, resilience, and the courage to rise stronger after every fall.